If you were hoping to show up for the Christian nationalism class, we had over twice as many people sign up as we had room for. And so as a result, Lowell and Chuck plan to offer that class again in the spring after Easter. So look forward to that with me. Let's start with a prayer, and then we'll talk a little bit about convention this weekend. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, thank you for this church, St. Paul's Church, the Diocese of Arkansas, the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Communion, and the entire body of Christ. Thank you that we are able to take our place in a community that is devoted to the spreading of the gospel and the relief of the needs of those among us. Help our life and our faith be a reflection of your love. Deepen our ways that we participate in your church. Help what we hear and share today guide us always into a deeper love of you and love of our neighbors, even as ourselves. Through Christ our Lord we pray. Amen. Diocesan Convention is a wonderful annual opportunity for the family of God that is the Episcopal Church in Arkansas to gather together. And I hoped that we might share a few reflections from our experience this weekend, but also give you a chance to share your reflections, both of the spirit of the diocese that you have already begun to perceive and experience since Bishop Harmon's election and ordination and consecration as our new bishop, but perhaps to ask questions of us. None of the delegates there is able to speak authoritatively about the ministries of the diocese except as we experience them and as we know them. So we might not be able to answer your questions, but I trust that the conversation that will unfold in response to them will be fruitful. Let me start by naming the people from St. Paul's and the surrounding community who went to Diocesan Convention in Little Rock. Convention started Friday evening with worship and finished yesterday mid-afternoon with worship. And those of us who went, our clergy went. Sarah, Casey Anderson Molina, the chaplain at St. Martin's, went. I went. Suzanne Stoner also was there. Laura and Lowell were excused. They were unable to be there this weekend, so our clergy were there. And then St. Paul's is entitled to 4 delegates. And at St. Paul's, our delegates are typically our 2 wardens. Jeannie Wayne and Elizabeth Rosen were there as delegates, and then 2 other delegates who are chosen by the vestry to serve 2 years in that capacity. This year, Susie Freeman was there as one of our delegates, and Trent Palmer was there as the other delegate. Trent is facilitating the AV in Father Chuck and Lowell's class, so he's not able to be with us. But in addition to our clergy delegates and our lay delegates, we had several other people who were there and active in the life of convention. And those include Christy Palmer, who was there as an alternate. She was also an exhibitor on behalf of Camp Mitchell and some of the ministries that happen at Camp Mitchell. Jonathan Leonard was there. Did I see Jonathan in here? Is he the youth? He might be with the youth group. Jonathan Leonard was there as a visitor. London West was also there as a visitor. So a chance for us to all share our own experience of that. And I'd actually like to start there. Those of you who were at convention, with me, I want you to think about what's one word or maybe one brief phrase that you would use to describe or to characterize your experience of convention. We'll say more about it in a minute, but I want to give the people who are there a chance to think about what's a word or a phrase that you would use to characterize convention. I'll go first, and then I'll give everybody else a chance to respond. The word I came up with was refreshing. That was my word. Sarah, and then if you'll help the others use the microphone, thank you.
My word would be inspiring.
Well, since you took my word, no, I'm just kidding. My word would be God's grace. God's grace.
Thank you. Elizabeth and then Suzanne. And Christy. Yeah, thank you.
Renewed hope.
Renewed hope.
Renewed hope. Ditto to all the above. Openness.
Agree with all the above for sure, and engaging would be my word.
Yeah, thank you. It was our first convention with Bishop Harmon as our bishop, and I'm really excited to hear the perspectives that were shared just now, and I hope others in the room are excited about that as well. I think it says a lot about this chapter that we are beginning in the life of our diocese. It has been, is it 17 years since our last new bishop? Think about where you were 17 years ago, right? 17 years ago would have been 2007. I was a brand new priest. That's a long time. Some of you have been born since then. Some of you have had children since then. Some of you have buried loved ones since then, moved since then, become Episcopalian since then. It's been 17 years since we had someone new leading us as a bishop. And although the bishop doesn't have a whole lot to do with the day-to-day operations at St. Paul's, that's up to us and our vestry, the bishop does shape the life that we experience in the life of the wider diocese through the vision that he shares, the ministries that he focuses on, and also his presence and his leadership at gatherings, whether big ones like this weekend or small ones, small committees or groups that gather. So I've already begun to see the ways in which Bishop Harmon's charisms, his gifts, are beginning to shape my experience of the church in Arkansas, and also I hope others as well, and I hear some of that in the responses. I thought we might walk a little bit through the schedule of convention and give participants a chance to share their observations and also give space for you to ask questions. Let's start with worship on Friday evening, all right? So we gather at the cathedral, Trinity Cathedral, for worship. The bishop is the presider at the Eucharist. The bishop is the preacher at the Eucharist. For many of us, it was our first time to hear Bishop Harmon preach. It was my first time to hear him preach. I've heard him speak before, but I'd never heard him preach before. I remarked to someone, Casey Anderson Molina, he asked me what I thought about the worship service, because the worship was a little rough around the edges. Like it was not a well-oiled machine. It was beautiful, and I'll say more about that. And Casey asked about that. I said, well, if you came to my house and tried to make dinner in my house, it would be hard, it would be messy, and it would kind of stop and start, and you wouldn't know where everything was. And, a lot of the participants in worship, the clergy and laity that were there from St. Paul's, as well as many others, that's not our home church. So we don't know exactly where to go and how to walk and where to sit. And the organist, for example, this organist pauses a really long time before each stanza in the hymn. And I kept singing and then having to stop because I was singing a solo until the organist caught back up. So, those kind of rhythms take a little while to get used to. So part of my experience of worship was new and fresh and a little taking shape. I want to use a positive because I do think it's a positive experience. It's transitional, it's growing, it's evolving, and I want to convey that. But I also want to recognize that it was a little unusual. It was new to a lot of people. That was part of my experience. I'll say more about the positive. Let me give other participants. What did you notice about the opening worship service, about the sermon that you heard, about the hymns or the music that you heard, about the people that you sat near? What did you notice in opening worship? Any of you who were there? And if any of you watched online, if you chose to live stream the worship service, please, by all means, share your experience. I'd be surprised if many of us took time to watch the Convention Eucharist online through the cathedral's website, but if you did, please share your experience of that. Other experiences? Yep.
Being my first time at Trinity and at General Convention, I thought it was a magical weekend, mainly because of Bishop Harmon's presence. And I know you'll talk more about the second day, but Friday night was beautiful in the sense I loved the procession. Many processions around the church and through the aisles I thought was really, really pretty. I was surprised that the cathedral looked very much like St. Paul's, just a little bit bigger. Same kind of design, which was lovely. I felt that people were super warm and welcoming, and I thought his sermon was very good. He talked about the circles, and if you watched it online, I thought that circle sermon was really resonated with me. I thought it was just really fun. And yes, it was different. I too paused on the sarcasm. I do appreciate our music program here. They had a nice music program, but I think ours is far superior with our choirs and our music program. I will say that. But it was a magical night for me. I was privileged to be there and thankful that I got to take part.
Thank you for that. What other remembrances about the opening worship service or Friday night in general? Suzanne, anything that you'd add?
Well, one of the things I noticed was the choice of music, the choice of hymns. They were slightly more devotional, more heart-centered, and singable, highly singable, and not to support that way over others, but the experience of singing together is something that I sometimes miss when new hymns or unusual hymns were being introduced for the sake of broadening our experience, but at the expense of that belting out the way the cathedral does when they know, well, the way the diocese does when we know the hymn. So I noticed the difference in hymns. Sarah's smiling.
Thank you. I agree. I want to expand upon that and draw a distinction between the hymns and the service music. Because the service music was not sung by the congregation. It was Herbert Howell's setting of the Collegium Reguli, the King's. It was written for King's College. It was in English, but it was performed by the choir, and we participated through their singing. And so what an interesting contrast when the hymns invited us to sing and the service music invited us to listen. And again, that was one of those kind of rubs. Maybe it's the breadth of our experience, but also as Elizabeth said, I really like the way we do music at St. Paul's, right? Anyway, for some of that reason. But yeah.
And maybe Susie Freeman might interject here and say she felt robbed of the responses that we usually share.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Christy or Jeannie, anything you want to say about opening worship Friday night?
I experienced it as a very welcoming service, and I also remember comparing it to other services where it was not as welcoming at a diocesan-wide event. So I found it welcoming, and his sermon on widening our circle of people that we interact with was very inspiring.
Yeah. Thank you. People are watching online, and they want to hear what you have to say, so use that microphone.
I guess the only thing I would add to that, I have some things to say about the next day, but I would say that it did feel very welcoming. And there was something about the resonance of his voice as he spoke that was magical to me. I mean, it was lilting, and it was heartfelt, and it was genuine. And aside from just the words he spoke, which were inspiring, just his way of speaking, and a certain graciousness about him that was just unusual and very welcoming. So I agree with everything everybody else said.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Can I add
Yeah,
one?
of course.
And I certainly don't mean it as a criticism, just to notice that we have the rubrics and the prayer book, and so we kind of get in that flow and that rhythm. And when anything is extra, Bishop Harmon is incredibly prayerful, and he'll interject some of his prayers either before the service or before his sermon or before the Eucharist. And I was just like, oh, what's he doing now? But I mean, it's still prayerful and holding. It was just pointed out maybe my own distraction or my own habits, and brought me more present to the moment. So it's certainly not a criticism, just a notice of a difference.
Yeah, and I think we will notice that difference. Bishop Harmon will be here on May 5th for an annual visitation, and so that's not that long from now. The good news is he will have had several visitations by then to kind of get familiar with his own pattern, because he's got to learn how to do this. He's never done this before. Every bishop I've ever spoken to, everyone has said they thought the job was going to be a lot like being a priest, just a little different. It's a completely different job. It's a completely different order. It's a completely different presence. And it's a lot of learning on the job. So we'll have that benefit. But we will notice some things right away that are different. And I feel both some excitement, some anxious excitement, the butterflies at that, but also what I heard Christy say is a wonderful openness. It's as if the host of this event were brand new, the newest person in the room. And everybody else kind of recognized that our job, therefore, is to learn with this host, this convener, the presider, the holder of the space. So I sensed some graciousness. Kind of the rough edges that I spoke to earlier actually were a gracious invitation, because we could tell that the person in charge was still learning, which invited those of us who didn't come fully versed in exactly how everything would go, would also give ourselves permission to learn along with them. So I felt some real graciousness there. I want to say I tried to do some research in the service by looking through the prayer book. I don't know upon what the bishop based the choice of the lessons. It might have been Friday in the first week of Lent. I didn't look at those lessons, but I don't know. We're not allowed to choose the lessons we want. I'm sure he picked a particular set of lessons, a particular set of propers. I don't know where it came from, but for whatever reason, Matthew 9 was the gospel lesson, and the part right after the calling of Matthew, the tax collector, which we didn't hear, but he talked about in his sermon. But he did talk about after that, Jesus spends time at table with tax collectors and Pharisees. And I want to say a little bit more about the widening of the circle, which was a theme not only of the sermon, but of the whole of convention. It became even clearer on Saturday. But the bishop says to us, our job as followers of Jesus, as Christians, as the Episcopal Church, is to widen that circle, just as Jesus did, and to widen it in ways that make us uncomfortable, to widen us in ways that begin to image or reflect God's widening of that circle, always wider than we can imagine. And that visual image and the devotion centered on that spirit, that image pervaded all that we did throughout the weekend. And I thought that was a really full way to say that. And it came back in some pretty profound ways on Saturday. I think opening worship is maybe the highlight of convention. I mean, it's for me, it's so good to be worshiping together as the community. Like we get to see St. Paul's. I don't know how often you go to another Episcopal church in Arkansas. Maybe you have children or grandchildren or parents who live somewhere else. Maybe you get a chance to visit those other spaces. But this is a chance for almost every church in the diocese to be together in one shared expression of worship, which is actually what we do every Sunday, but it's harder to see when we're in these walls and not in the cathedral where everyone is present. I sense that to start what we do and to ground what we do in that shared worship is really important. And the bishop invited us on Saturday morning in a way that I'm still sort of pondering, to think of the business session as a continuation of and an extension of our worship. I think Bishop Harmon is very worship-centered. As I've heard several people say, he's very devotional. He will lose himself in the moment that he is encountering in a way that was not Bishop Benfield's gift. Bishop Benfield, and those of us who could identify with that, we always have a clock running in the back of our head. Like, I feel like if you stopped Larry Benfield on the street and said, without looking at your watch, what time is it? He would tell you almost to the second exactly what time it is. John Harmon is fully present in whatever moment is ahead of him in kind of a devotional way, whether it's a conversation with you, and the people around him are like, you're running late, but he's just totally focused on what's in front of him. And I think that starts with he's very grounded in worship, in devotion, in encountering God in worship, but also in the other ins and outs. Let me pause for a moment. Questions about what you've heard so far, reflections. What are you hearing? What would you reflect back to those of us who are there? Jeannie, behind you. Thank you.
I have a sense of excitement inside. And part of that is I'm thinking you can't widen the circle without disrupting what we've done before.
Yeah.
I don't think it's possible.
Yeah. Thank you. I think Bishop Harmon I think that's absolutely right. I think Bishop Harmon was intentional to not articulate his ministry or his vision as a disruption from his predecessor. However, that's true for each one of us. As that circle gets widened, he did talk about the circle has to break to get wider, right? The barrier that circle has represented, when we've drawn a circle and we've decided who's in and who's out, in order for it to widen, it has to break. So maybe some allusions to that. I find it, and I said this to somebody in the sacristy this morning, I find it really easy because Bishop Harmon and Bishop Benfield are so different. It's easy for me to speak about Bishop Harmon with enthusiasm and excitement in a way that might come across as a criticism of Bishop Benfield. I do not mean it as such. I mean it only as a comparison. I don't hear you use that as well. But I do think who we are in our own experience has to be disrupted. Yeah, say more about that. Yeah.
Well, I didn't mean disruption in a bad way
Yeah.
all. I just meant we have to, to grow, things change. It doesn't mean that things are not what they were. It just means that what was changes a bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Its color or shape or, those kind of things.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to hijack your statement, but it's been on my mind as well to name that that although it is new, I don't want to cast aspersions on the past. But yeah, thank you. What else? Other reflections? What you've heard? What are you hearing? What would you respond to in a question, in a wondering, in a pondering? What are you hearing? What are you noticing in the words that you hear described of convention by those who were there? Any other reflections? Yeah, Adam.
Yeah, I guess I'm mostly curious. It seems like there is a big change in style between the two different bishops' personalities, so I'm curious to see what that means for the diocese and how that might change as he gets settled in.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an oversimplification of it, but to say, like Bishop Benfield, he has an MBA from Wharton Business School. Like he's a banker. He knows money really well. So part of what we will have to learn is like Bishop Benfield walked into the room always knowing more about the finances than anyone else in the room. Anybody. That was his strength. So as a result, like the rest of the people around him were sort of there just to say, thank you, tell us what we need to do. I don't think that's Bishop Harmon's principal gift. And so as a result, like not only in that tiny way, which is to say the money part, Bishop Harmon's going to change the way we do things by sharing some of that authority necessarily with others. We'll also, I think, see some of that as well. And I don't think John Harmon would be able to say, this is how it's going to be different, but I think in so many countless ways of personality, of gifts, of presence, of energy, of time, of focus, that will, as you anticipate, and I do too, change things in pretty exciting ways. Yeah. Thank you. Christy. And then Suzanne.
Oh, to piggyback on that, every bishop has their gifts, and one gift that I feel like I witnessed at this convention was his gift for talking to children. And he really, he talked to the smallest children, youth. It was just very impressive how he made an intentional contact with every person that approached him.
Yeah, thank you. Suzanne.
Great to piggyback on Christy because, as Evan said, London went with us, and London had a private audience with the bishop. Toward the end of the reception, they sat and they visited, and he asked her what 3 things he ought to be focused on as bishop, and they had a conversation around that. But she said she had a word for him as well. And that was, she said, your position as bishop is very powerful, is the way she explained it. It's very powerful, and you draw people in a powerful way to yourself. And she said that can be used for ill. And she used a different word, but for ill. And she said, you'll need to be wary to use that on behalf of others. And he was so delighted. He threw his head back. He was so delighted to hear that. But that, I want to bring that point out, that's it's funny how we love his message, and we do, about opening the circles, but given that he's fairly charismatic in his presence, it may cause us to circle around him. And again, the energy that London brings out is that being at the center, at that powerful center, he needs to help us, open the edges and disrupt the tidiness of the circle that draws around him.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Any other reflections on what you've heard so far? Well, let me say a little bit about the content of business, and then I'll say more about the bishop's presence in particular. I want to say a couple of words about diocesan finances. I won't say much about that. And then I also want to share a little bit about a Camp Mitchell update and any other updates. I want to invite the participants to share also what they heard about the various ministries of the diocese. The long and the short of it is 2023 was financially a better year than the diocese expected, but still resulted in a significant deficit. They budgeted a $96,000 deficit, and they ended up with a $54,000 deficit. So, they lost money in terms of the operations, but not as much as they expected, which is good news. They spent less than they expected to, and they got more money than they expected to, which is a good way to run a business. However, as the treasurer noted for us, if you run a $54,000 deficit every year, it's only a matter of time before you're not able to sustain that practice. But even more, let me say another word about 2023. Assets are up in general. Even though they operated at a deficit, overall assets of the diocese are up. The operating assets, despite all of that, are actually up slightly. That was not shared with convention, but I've seen that report. And the overall assets are up, led primarily by a double-digit gain in investments in the endowment. And if you have money in markets, you also have experienced that gain in 2023. 2023 ended up as a good year for the stock market, and that means a good year for the endowment and the investments of the diocese. So overall, an increase in assets despite a deficit budget. So not all bad news. But what I think got my attention on Executive Council, and I since got the attention of the diocese, is that we've adopted a budget with an even bigger deficit for 2024, and it's a $180,000 deficit. Which, as the treasurer announced to us, he thinks it'll be better than that, because we always end the year a little better than we expect. But that certainly has his attention and the bishop's attention and Executive Council's attention. As a member of Executive Council, when we debated that budget, what we recognized was, in order for us to get a balanced budget or even closer to a balanced budget, we would have to make some unilateral decisions about ministries in the diocese and decide then and there that we were pulling the plug on ministries. And we would rather, as an Executive Council, and I think as a diocese, give Bishop Harmon the chance to learn about us and then articulate a vision for ministry before we start crossing things off from the start. One of the significant costs to the diocese is St. Martin's. They are now funding Casey Martin as a Casey Anderson Molina as a full-time chaplain, in addition to supporting that campus ministry. That's a significant amount that results in a lot of that deficit. The bishop could have said, we're going to cancel it and fire Casey, but the bishop knows that that's a mistake for now. A year from now, I don't know what it will mean, but the bishop is committed to college ministry, committed to youth and children's ministry, committed to formation, committed to supporting our parishes, committed to the work of outreach. So I sense that Executive Council and the diocese and the bishop as well are mindful of that, and I have a feeling that within a year we'll see a significant change in where our priorities are, but being able to do that in a way that reflects the bishop's what he's helped us identify as our priorities as a diocese. But that's certainly worth noting. Either reflections from those who are there or from others. I can't tell you a lot more than I've told you, but questions or comments about that? Jeannie up front, and anybody else, raise your hand and we'll bring you the microphone.
This is sort of a follow-on to your comment about widening the circle. And we had some excellent questions from the floor of the bishop, and he was remarkable in the way that he answered the questions. You're right that he was very present with whatever, and he's the kind of person you feel like would give you all the time in the world if you wanted to talk to him and would forget everybody else in the room. And he sort of did that with all of us collectively. Someone asked him, when we were talking about widening the circle, what about immigrants? And it was an interesting question, because I don't know about you, but I wasn't sure if that was a hostile question or not. It kind of sounded like it might have been, but I didn't want to think it was a hostile question from among us, so I gave it the benefit of the doubt. And he was interesting. He said, he started it with, I'm an immigrant, and I lived in a country that was flooded with immigrants, and my parents built 2 rooms on the back of the house to welcome immigrants and give them a place to stay, and always had food for them. So he was conveying an answer to that question in a way that could not be mistaken. And he said something, and I wasn't quite sure about this, Evan, but in answer, sort of speaking to your question about widening the circle, someone asked him a question about a particular kind of criminal offender that should we welcome them into the circle? And his response was that the circle that we have is the circle of Christ, and you don't. He didn't use the word infect, but you welcome people into the circle who come into the circle of Christ, right? And so you make room for people who are able to, I guess, change. Would you take it that way, something like that? It was hard to understand. It was hard to make out what he was answering. I think that was a difficult question, but I think he does intend. It's a sort of radical hospitality. You accept the other, and you widen the circle as you do, but that does not mean you sacrifice the body of Christ as we are. So, I mean, that's how I heard it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, and that's a great, it's that kind of vision that I think will help us know better what budgets are going to look like for the coming year, for sure. We're going to come back to the question and answer bit in a little bit, but if you have questions or comments about budget or finances, this is a good time to share them. Suzanne in the back, and then we'll come to more general sort of comments about the bishop and his presence. But Suzanne first.
Well, he met with the women clergy of the diocese early, and so we heard it there, and we heard again in a number of different ways how it reminded me of the way Eliot talks about faculty, that you need to put the best faculty teaching the incoming students, and instead of reserving them only for the graduates. Is that fair enough? Yeah, okay. I don't speak for you. But over and over we heard the bishop say that the best, most well-educated and gifted priests need to be out in the tiny edge churches of the diocese. So it's almost as if he would push clergy funding and clergy, but he doesn't know how it's going to happen, but it's a high value. Is that not right? A high value of his that we put the best out where the church is most vulnerable.
Thank you. Haley Allen. And then back to Christy.
I really wanted to ask about that particularly because I know that we have like a very, very robust church here, and in other places, I know that the parishes are struggling, and I was wondering if that's still the case. I know that Eureka Springs Church burned down, and that I'm not sure how Pine Bluff is doing and all that, and I was wondering if y'all got a sense of whether, like, since he said that he's doing that funding for the smaller churches, and what does that mean for us since we're doing so well? Like, are all of our good clergy going to move to somewhere else?
Good question, and I think the bishop might say maybe, right? The bishop can't move us. We don't work like that in the Episcopal Church. We're sort of free agents. But you named it already. The diocese has entered into an agreement with the retiring executive director of Episcopal Church Foundation, Donald Rumashik, I can't remember his last name. Anyway, and he's going to lead kind of a program designed to equip small churches for flourishing. So a lot of his attention is in that direction. I don't think he would take something away from us, except to say that the resources of the diocese need to be spread in a way that allows vitality and flourishing in communities where it's currently unable to because of financial limitations, clergy limitations, and the like. We have 0 full-time priests south of I-40. I think that's right. 0 full-time, maybe Hot Springs, that's an exception. Hot Springs is an exception, but except for Hot Springs, there's nobody wants to move to Pine Bluff or Helena or any of these places, or El Dorado. Nobody's moving there. So do they give up on the hope of a priest? Do we change the way that priestly ministry looks? The bishop is interested in that, among other things. The bishop named 3 priorities as he arrived: small churches, youth, children and youth, and clergy wellness. Those are 3 of the bishop's priorities, but small churches is right at the front of that. So I think in time we'll see some of that shift. Also, I think when the diocese spends a lot of money on parish development, and historically a lot of that has gone to support seminarians, part of their stipend as they work at a church. Often that money gets sent to places like the cathedral when a seminarian comes out and they really need one, and that person wants to work there. And I can imagine, I don't know this, but I can imagine the diocese saying, no, we're only going to support and send seminarians to places that have no chance of paying for those clergy. And you'll have to live with 2 or 3, right? Yeah. Alan?
I really appreciate the topic of St. Martin's, and I'm glad it's coming to the awareness of the diocese. St. Martin's has an image problem. All the other facilities off campus that attract college students have been updated. St. Martin's has not. It's nice, but if you're walking along Maple and you're wondering what to do with your free time, lots and lots of free time, remember, you look at St. Martin's and it's nice, but it reminds me of a building from the 70s or 80s. I don't think we're typical. It just doesn't say, look, we're here, come on in. It says, we're nice, you might need to be invited, you might not. So the vision, the eyeballs of young people are very different from what I would bet everyone in this room thinks. It's a digital generation. It's very, very quick to evaluate, scroll, yes, no. And that's, I think, part of the problem. We're the best kept secret. I don't think young people get it that we're as inviting as we are. So I think a change, if you look, there's always a very open plaza. There's nice furniture. There's great lighting. It's almost like a cafe, a restaurant that is situated with the street, and that's.
Yeah, and I hope you'll share that. Share that
So
with the bishop.
yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I think that's a big change that would need to happen to break down the secret that we don't want.
I appreciate that. And the bishop said several times, and he said it before, right? We don't tell our story, right? We're a best kept secret. Christy and then Elizabeth.
Agree with you, Alan, for sure. Two things that I just made note of that he said in those sessions is, if you have money, invest it in missions. And
We'll buy you a plaque, right?
Yeah,
if you have money invested in missions, we'll get you a plaque. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And go where the ministry is needed, not necessarily where the population growth is. I mean, he didn't say that, but
Yeah.
go where the ministry is needed. And he also talked a little bit about listening sessions around the state.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could say more
Yeah,
about that.
I plan to. Yeah, thank you. I plan to. Yeah, thank you. Elizabeth, and then we're going to move on to a new topic.
Yeah, this refers to St. Martin's. He did say, I believe, that he had some college ministry experience. And the one thing that really resonated with me across the board that would apply to St. Martin's is the statement about the 4 Ps. That you have to have a place, you have to have people, you have to have a purpose, and then you have to have a promise. And that was kind of in regard to a college ministry and how to get those people to come, whether that be your own personal church or St. Paul's. And I think that really resonated with me about not just a college ministry, but even your own church that could be applied to a St. Paul's. If you have the place and you have the people, and then you tell them the purpose, and then you promise to follow through with that purpose, people will come. But you have to understand you have to change and offer them something for them to come, a reason for them to come, and that would be the purpose. And then promise you'll follow through. That's
Thank
very
you.
powerful.
Yeah, thank you. Interestingly enough, I mean, and a lot of the way he talks about mission is different. He would say the goal of St. Martin's is not to make Episcopalians. That is not the goal of St. Martin's. The goal of St. Martin's is to represent the Episcopal identity in the university community. He's not interested in getting people into pews after they graduate. That's often how we think of it. He wants to be the Episcopal Church. He wants to be present in the university community. It's a very different way of doing that. So anyway, we'll come back to that. Camp Mitchell, update from Camp Mitchell. Some of you might have read this in Camp Mitchell's newsletters, and I'll ask Christy to expand upon what I say. Rebecca Retzel, the executive director, was with us. She was invited to speak to convention. She named for us, to great applause, that Camp Mitchell ended the year with a slight surplus budget. That's a new thing for Camp Mitchell. She was committed to that. She also reminded us that it's not only because of careful spending, but also because of individuals, groups, and parishes that have used Camp Mitchell, and a lot of individual donations. I can't remember the number. 164? 100 and how many?
Well, 125 new donors.
Yep, 125 new donors.
And they have a big push for monthly giving, which has really, really helped the budget. Even $10, $20, $30 a month makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Because their budget is not huge.
It's not. She didn't talk about this, but the cost of capital improvements was still vastly more than the operating budget. That's not a part of the operating budget, but a new septic system and sewer system and renovations of cabins, that's also being raised through other donations and a little bit of debt, a little bit of loans, but manageable. But she presented to us kind of an enthusiasm and an excitement about Camp Mitchell, invited us to consider Camp Mitchell. Our vestry goes there, our parish goes there, some of our small groups go there, men's retreats, summer camps, ECW, Summer Quest, is that right? And other groups. So anyway, think of Camp Mitchell as our camp. It's a bit of a haul to get there, but I think it's really important for us to support Camp Mitchell not only financially, but also as individuals and as the parish, but also through our presence and our enthusiasm and through our communication. Christy, what would you share in addition to that about Camp Mitchell?
Thanks, Evan. Thanks for the plug here. Registration for summer is open. If anyone has a child, knows a child, has a grandchild who wants to go to, who's interested in summer camp, it is open and available, and it's an amazing experience. It was for my children and many other children as well. Service retreat will take place February 28th to March 1st. It's open. If anyone wants to go for half a day, full day, the whole time, we're going to have people from across the diocese join in to support Camp Mitchell. The registration is open and it's very inexpensive. It's a donation-based stay. Men's retreat, April 19th to 21st. Women's retreat, May 31st to June 2nd, and those registrations are open. And Bishop Harmon will be at both the men's retreat and the women's retreat this year. So if you want to go and get to know him, he's going to be presenting, and I think those will be really great opportunities.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I want to make sure we save time to talk about Bishop Harmon in general, and then give time for your questions and comments. Let me say my experience of convention and Bishop Harmon's presence, I found the first business session to be awkward and halting and uncomfortable. And it wasn't until later in the day that I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think part of that is because the script that was given to him was not for him. It was still for his predecessor, and he's being asked to function in a role that isn't his role. It will take him at least a year to figure that out, and we saw a lot of that in the second half of Saturday. But the first half, nobody bothered to tell him that we can certify the nominations that require consent of convention as a group instead of doing them individually. And there was kind of awkward, and nobody sort of knows how to communicate with him. And so it was not fun. I thought, ugh, there's no energy, there's no life. So when it felt like Bishop Harmon was being asked to be his predecessor and not be himself, I was not drawn in to the energy of the room. I'll let others speak about their experience. But as soon as he took the stage, in his own words, he offered his address, and then as we heard before, he took questions from the floor. Totally different experience. Not only from the first part of convention, but from conventions for, I'm guessing, the last 17 years in Arkansas. His energy, his presence, his pastoral connection with those in the room, his ability to hear a question, respond to that question succinctly, directly, in sometimes challenging ways, but without being combative, and yet not shying away from that. It was really masterfully done. There were a couple of questions that made me uncomfortable. It felt like, and this is, I'm sure, my projection. I didn't ask the people who asked them, but it felt like people were seizing upon the opportunity to force a new bishop to take a stand that might make him uncomfortable to stand. What are you going to do about pansexuality? What are you going to do about the immigrant? I heard the immigrant question as, I dare you to answer this question. And his response was not combative. He probably could have said a little bit more in response to the question about sexuality, in terms of standing up for those who might be vulnerable. I had a conversation afterwards with that. But I thought he did a really good job to essentially say that question is out of bounds without saying it's out of bounds, and instead to challenge us to expand that circle, staying on message, but also sharing with us sort of his gifts. The immigration comment was the same. His response to a question about Camp Mitchell, response to a question about St. Martin's and college ministry. I mean, just when he was able to be on his message and speak from his heart, gosh, it was beautiful. It was joyful. It was energizing. We all left. I heard it in the responses. We left with excitement, enthusiasm, renewal, refreshment, looking forward to what's ahead of us. But it took me until the second part of Saturday to get there. I trusted that we would eventually get there, but I failed to appreciate how fully he was being asked to fill a particular role that might not have been designed or written for him. So I have a lot of hope as that comes ahead. The other thing I want to say about his address, he named, we've said a couple of them, three things, three initiatives. One, the listening sessions. He is forming a committee headed by the chairs of the Transition Committee and the Search Committee, Michael McNeely and Jerry Adams, to hold 12 listening sessions around the diocese where we will have a chance to talk about what matters to us and what our hopes are for the future of the diocese. So that was one. Second is the partnership for for small congregations. And third, the development of a finance committee to sort of share some of the financial authority beyond just the bishop and his very small circle, but to expand that. And there might have been others, but those are the three big, there's theology, but the three big initiatives that I took away were those three. Let me pause and ask other people who were present to share what I might have missed or for your own experience of the bishop and the bishop's leadership, especially on Saturday. Yeah, Sarah.
And building on what Suzanne mentioned, that the bishop met with the women's clericus, so all the women clergy in the diocese from 8. His understanding is that it was from 8 to 9. Well, guess what time the business session started? 9. And so we met at 8, and he's sitting at the table with all of us gathered around, and he just presented himself. He's like, I am here for you. But you know what the story that he started with? He pointed out Reverend Kate, Dean Moe, Reverend Elizabeth, and who else is?
Mary Vanno?
Yeah, and Reverend Mary Vanno. And he said, those are rectors of large parishes who are female. And he said, from outside the Diocese of Arkansas, they see women in positions of leadership in Arkansas and think that women run the diocese. And he looked around and he's like, what is your perception? And we very politely didn't say anything, much. But, that's not typically the perception. And so Bishop Harmon is very astute. And he's like, people of color, women who are in minority, he's like, I want to talk to you about power and authority. And he basically said, I have your back. He said, I will stand with you. I will die on that hill for you. And he said that not only to us, but he also said it to the convention, that when it comes to what is loving and liberating, he is prepared to die for what Christ has given him to do for us, for the church, for Christ's body. And that is very powerful to say, and he means it. And I was telling Evan earlier that he shared some experiences that he's had in his life that have been traumatic and violent toward himself. And so he speaks from a place of lived experience, impassioned and honest. And he said, I will be honest and open, he said, and I will not always succeed. I will fail. And when I fall on my face, I would appreciate if you were there to help me back up and show me, how we can move forward together. So he's like, just walk with me, be with me, I have your back. Kind of like, and I hope you have mine. And as somebody who was on the search committee, I feel protective of him in a sense that it's not my job to protect him. But I hope that as a diocese that we can support him, not in a way to circle around him like elephants and protect him from the outside, but in a way that we can keep that chain open and ever including others. And so the listening that he offered, he said, I promise to be open and honest with you. And he said, if it's an emergency, he told us how to contact him. If it's not an emergency, he told us how to contact him. He looks forward to the listening sessions, like the meet and greets that we had when we were, doing the search in the very beginning. That he said that there will be a scribe, an observer, and a facilitator. And none of those will be him. He will be there as an observer and listener for his own. But when things are happening and people are talking, if everybody's like, yeah, and there's somebody in there going, he wants that noted so that he can tell where the energy is in the diocese, where the priorities are, where the energy is in not only in the room, but for the diocese. Was there anything else that he said at Women's Clericus that's good summary? Okay.
Christy, what about your experience of the bishop?
Well, I was glad to see that he gave time for the several outreach programs, I don't know what you would call all the ministries He let St. Francis House, Social Justice, Sarah presented, EFM, Camp Mitchell, and Dick Johnston Camp each give a short talk, which, I mean, that says that's a priority for him, so I was glad to see that.
Agreed. Thank you. Other experiences of the bishop. Elizabeth?
I loved how he said when he comes to visit your specific church, he will do prep work and talk to people at the church so he will know something about you and what your church wants him to help you with. He is so connected and so willing to listen. He is a magical, charismatic speaker. And as he spoke at the end, I agree with you. The first half was a little awkward. The second half was smooth as glass. And he looked around the room, and how many people were sitting forward in their chair, listening, engaged. The hope, the smiles, the anticipation of what to come was certainly very encouraging, for sure.
Thank you. Others?
And I can't wait to see, he said that he identifies a biblical character with each parish. And so I can't wait to see what he thinks St. Paul's, which character we are.
Yeah.
Maybe all the disciples. I don't know.
Let me finish by saying about convention. I think the best part of a diocesan convention is the family reunion part. Like we all get to come together and hear and see and experience that, what dishes are you good at making and what stories do you have to share. It's been a while since we've had that opportunity in the diocese, and even this convention wasn't fully structured that way. The structure of our convention of late has been business focused, and we actually finished early because there's not a lot of business for us to do. I anticipate that in the years ahead, the bishop will shift and shape the way we interact with each other at convention to provide more opportunity for conversation. There was a lot of downtime. He kind of said, should we take another break? And we were like, no, let's keep going. But there was a lot of time for us to visit outside of the formal sessions, which I crave. I love that opportunity. And I think we'll see more of that. I think this bishop prioritizes relationships and vision and shared ministry, not just what can be accomplished in a weekend. And I sense that will very quickly shape not only the meetings, but also the ministries that we see unfolding around us. I'm really excited about Bishop Harmon's ministry as our bishop. He'll be here on May the 5th. As Elizabeth said, he's going to take time to get to know some of the leaders of the church on Zoom before he shows up. He says, when you walk through the door, it's not the time to get to know people, it's the time to celebrate what you're doing. So he wants to get to know that. That's a deep commitment to his presence and ministry as our bishop, as our chief pastor, as the chief preacher and teacher of the diocese. He sets that pattern for us, and I think he has stepped into that fully, and I look forward to seeing how it continues to take shape and unfold. Thank you all for being present today. Next week, don't forget, next week at this hour, George Anthony Morton, our Tippy lecturer, will give his second lecture Saturday night and then Sunday morning, and then we'll have a series for the rest of Lent. Glad y'all are here. Thank you so much.